The harsh winter wind swept across the barren branches of the oak trees that lined the outskirts of the village, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something ominous that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers. For on this day, the clouds seemed darker than usual, the sea more turbulent, and the silence was broken only by a growing unease. Little did they know that lurking on the horizon, hidden by the gray veil of the storm, were vessels of terror, harbingers of pain that would soon shatter the tranquility of their world. For many years, the coastal village of Hidabi had enjoyed a tranquil existence. The rhythmic ebb and flow of the tides, the cries of gulls, and the laughter of children were the soundtrack of their days. Life was simple, governed by the seasons, sustained by the bounty of the land and sea. But today, an unseen menace was advancing, threatening to engulf their peaceful existence. And when the Vikings struck, they struck with the swiftness and brutality of a winter storm. From their vantage point, atop the cliffs, the lookout had seen them coming, their longships cutting through the waves like hungry wolves. With grim faces, they sounded the alarm, a discordant cry that tore through the village, rousing men, women, and children from their daily routines. A Viking raid was never just a raid. It was a calculated act of violence, a systematic dismantling of a community, a destruction that went beyond material losses and delved deep into the hearts and souls of the inhabitants. As the men of the village rushed to assemble their defenses, the women gathered their children close, their voices hushed, their eyes wide with fear. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared dread that transcended words. The Vikings were known for their merciless ways, their disregard for life, and their insatiable hunger for riches. And among their most prized possessions were the women of the raided villages. Despite their valiant efforts, the defenders were hopelessly outnumbered. Within minutes, the Vikings had landed and were sweeping through the village, their axes flashing in the sunlight, their shouts echoing with the promise of pain and destruction. Homes were abandoned, livestock left behind, and the villages fled, seeking refuge where they could find it. But the Vikings were relentless, their thirst for plunder and pillage unquenchable. It wasn't long before Astrid and her younger sister Solveig found themselves separated from their parents in the ensuing chaos. The two sisters clung to each other, their small hands intertwined, their innocent faces streaked with tears and grime. They were too young to understand the full horror of their situation, but they knew they were afraid, very afraid. The Vikings, with their horned helmets and fierce expressions, were figures straight out of a nightmare. They moved with a terrifying speed and precision, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The sight of their parents being dragged away, their pleas for mercy ignored, was seared into their young minds, a trauma that would forever color their perspectives on life and loss. Astrid, at 16, was considered a prime target, a prize to be coveted and claimed. She was strong-willed, with fiery red hair that mirrored her spirit and a spirit that refused to be Solveig, all of 10 years old, was smaller, quieter, and with a gentle nature that made her all the more vulnerable. They were taken down to the shore, where Waiten longships offered no solace, only the promise of a journey into the unknown. The Vikings, with their guttural language and barbaric customs, were a stark contrast to all Astrid and Solveig had ever known. The cramped conditions on the ships, the stench of sweat and waste, and the constant threat of violence made each day a test of endurance. Upon reaching the market, Astrid and Solveig were part of a grim spectacle, a display of human misery for the highest bidder. Their childhood innocence was a commodity now, their futures traded like livestock. Their new owners, a ruthless lot, saw them as instruments of labor, sources of cheap thrills, and in some cases, objects to be bartered away. Astrid and Solveig found themselves in a different corner of the empire, far from their home and loved ones. They had no way of knowing whether their parents had survived the raid or if they were alive somewhere, searching for their lost children. Their world had shrunk to the four walls of their new prison. Years turned into a blur of toil and sorrow. The playful banter of childhood was replaced by the dull ache of loss, the vibrant dreams of youth by the harsh realities of captivity. The stories of their childhood, once their solace, became bittersweet reminders of a life they could no longer access. For Astrid, the resilience she displayed as a child blossomed into a quiet strength. She channeled her emotions into acts of defiance, however small, finding a measure of solace in the resilience of the human spirit. She found friendship in unlikely places. forming bonds that gave her hope to endure. But as time marched on, Solveig's spirit seemed to wither. The carefree girl with pigtails and rosy cheeks was gone, replaced by a sullen teenager haunted by her past. Her spirit, once bright, dulled under the weight of her circumstances. A flicker of hope appeared on the horizon. A wealthy merchant's wife, known for her kindness and compassion, took notice of Solveig's plight. Recognizing the girl's innate worth, she discreetly offered her an opportunity, a chance to work in her household, a small step towards a semblance of freedom. Solveig's time in the merchant's house was a revelation. Amidst the opulence, she discovered a shred of the life she once knew, a taste of freedom that rekindled a dormant flame within her. But her path to true liberation was fraught with peril, for the Vikings had cast a long shadow over her, a shadow that threatened to engulf her newfound peace. Astrid, upon learning of Solveig's improved circumstances, felt a pang of longing, a yearning for a life that seemed to have been snatched away from her. She watched as Solveig blossomed under the merchant's wife's care, her spirit gradually being rekindled, her laughter echoing through the halls of the grand house. As Solveig began to heal, Astrid's resolve hardened. She realized that while fate had dealt them cruel blows, it had also left room for agency, however small. Astrid began to secretly plan her escape, driven by a fierce love for her sister and a burning desire for freedom. Meanwhile, news of the village's devastation reached the ears of a local lord. Outraged by the Vikings' brutality, he assembled a small band of soldiers, preparing to embark on a mission to recover what could still be salvaged and punish the perpetrators. With careful planning, Astrid managed to slip out of her captor's sight, disappearing into the bustling city. Her journey was fraught with danger, each step a gamble, each interaction a potential discovery, but her determination to reunite with Solveig fueled her every move. When the lord and his men arrived at the village, they were met with a scene of utter devastation. Homes were burnt and destroyed, fields lay trampled, and the only sounds were the mournful cries of seagulls and the lapping of the waves against the shore. It was a haunting testament to the Vikings' destructive rampage. Days turned into weeks, with no word from Astrid. Solveig began to lose hope, her spirits sinking once more. The grand house with its high walls and ornate furnishings felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. Unbeknownst to Solveig, Astrid had successfully made her way to the city and was working tirelessly to secure her freedom and that of her sister. She had found allies, people who believed in her cause and were willing to help, offering her food, shelter, and most importantly, a glimmer of hope. Astrid's resourcefulness and charm helped her secure a position as a servant in the household of a sympathetic noble. While the work was hard and the hours long, it was a strategic move that allowed her to remain hidden and gather the resources she needed for her daring plan. In secret, Astrid reached out to a network of underground sympathizers, individuals who understood the gravity of her situation and were willing to risk their own safety to aid her. Together, they devised a strategy, a risky maneuver, to infiltrate the Viking stronghold and rescue. The night before her escape, Solveig had a dream. She dreamt of a field of wildflowers, of the warm embrace of her parents, and of a sister who was reaching out to her, calling her name. It was a dream of hope, a beacon in the darkness that fueled her resolve. Under the cloak of darkness, Astrid and her companions approached the Viking stronghold, their movements swift and silent. Each step was laden with tension, the possibility of success mingling with the imminent danger of capture. Astrid's heart pounded in her chest as she crept closer to Solveig's room. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the lock, her mind racing with possibilities. With the lock finally giving way, Astrid slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim oil lamp hanging from the wall. The sight that greeted her was both heartbreaking and heartwarming. Solveig, thinner and paler than Astrid remembered, stared at her in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock and joy. In that instant, years of pain, fear, and separation melted away. Their reunion was a silent testament to the bond they shared, a bond forged in adversity and strengthened by hope. The perilous journey continued as Astrid and Solveig, accompanied by their newfound allies, navigated through the maze-like streets of the Viking town. Their goal, the river where a waiting boat would take them to safety. As dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Astrid and Solveig found themselves on the opposite bank, the Viking stronghold receding into the distance. They were free. In the aftermath, Astrid and Solveig found solace and healing in each other's company. They recounted their experiences, their voices shaking with a mixture of fear and triumph.